Well, Michele is here. Michele is an MK. She actually went to an MK school, and then did you go back and teach at that school? Kind of a welcome back Cotter thing. And she went, and that was Black Forest Academy. She now ministers to MKs and their parents all over the world. She's an author of 7 books. Some of you may have already read Pieces of Purple, the most recent one that we've been making available. But here's what's most important. She's here for us today. She's part of our continuing focus of hearing from other voices so that we can learn together. So, Michele, we welcome you to Pleasant Hill Community Church.
Thank you. Good morning. I realize that this is a bit of an unconventional way to do your Sunday morning service. I hope you'll just kind of stick with me as we look at a slightly different topic probably than you're used to looking at on Sunday mornings. The last time I was on this stage in this church was in 1996. I was just corrected by Scott this morning, not 93. That's what I was remembering. I had friends, Bev and Jean Tyndall, back in the day who attended here, and they invited me in to speak about essentially the same thing I'm going to speak about this morning. But that's been a lot of years in between. So if any of you were here then, I'm guessing you've forgotten what you heard by now. So this will hopefully be a little bit new to you as well. I believe that Jesus cared about the overlooked and the underserved. And I believe that a lot of times, as Pastor Scott has just mentioned, MKs themselves are the underserved and the overlooked in the world of ministry. Their parents get a lot of the attention. Their parents have the reports to give and the prayer letters to write, and sometimes the children don't get the attention that they ought to get. I also believe that one of the church's purposes is to equip its members to serve well, to equip its members to serve, shall I say, Jesusly. And because Jesus cared so well for children, I'm hoping that what we cover today will equip members of this church to care well for the children that come back on HMA, home ministry assignment, or furlough, what we used to call it, might come up onto this platform, might be in your Sunday school classrooms. And because we're so good at being chameleons, you might not realize that what you see on the surface is not necessarily reflecting what we are on the inside. So my hope, again, is that this will be an equipping morning for us all. So a brief introduction about me. What most American Christians know about MKs, and just to clarify, missionaries' kids, I'm going to be using MK the whole time, is what they have posted on their fridges. It's these prayer cards that we sent back once in a blue moon to our friends and strangers and churches. This is actually one of my family when I was little, and we're very careful about our prayer card design. We wear the matchy-matchy clothes. I'm pretty sure that my brother had spit in his hair from mom smoothing the hair down with spit, and we put on our best smiles, and then we print it and we send it out. And this is certainly one aspect of what being a missionary is. We certainly do have these wonderful moments of authentic smiles. We love where we live. We love doing God's work. This is absolutely one half of the picture. The other half of the picture sometimes is the outtakes from our family photo shoots, and those sometimes look more like this. That is me falling out of the back of the tractor. Because life on the mission field, just as life here, is not 100% perfect all the time. And just as children and teenagers here might have some challenges in their lives, children and teenagers overseas doing God's work will have some challenges in their lives too. So the reality of being a missionary's kid often is kind of a hybrid of these two pictures. It's somewhere between that and that reality lies. And because we hesitate to speak of the challenges, sometimes they go unnoticed and therefore unaddressed. That's why I'm here today. Because of the duality of the experience that so many MKs have, and because of how they internalize it so kind of organically, it's hard for people on the outside to understand who they are. It's actually even difficult for their own parents to understand who their children are. And that might seem counterintuitive because the parents are the people who spent the most time with their children, wherever it is that the children are growing up. But there's a very simple illustration that I want to share with you that explains why it is that there's this disconnect. And it's an illustration that I use a lot when I work with elementary-aged students to try and encourage them to tell mom and dad what you're thinking, because mom and dad might not just understand it just from living alongside you, right? So here's the illustration. I find a child in the classroom where I'm speaking, and I give him or her a jar, and I pour red beads into that jar. And I say, this is planet red. Mom and dad grew up on planet red. They know red. They have kind of roots going down into planet red. This is their formative culture. And then into the same jar, I pour some blue beads. And I say, this is planet blue. So when mom and dad left planet red and moved to planet blue, we added a color to their jar of beads. And now I have the child shake up the jar. And when he or she is done shaking up the jar, we have a mixture of red and blue beads, right? So mom and dad have a certain clarity about their cultural makeup. They can look at those beads, they can pull out the red and pull out the blue. They can know which beads belong on planet red and which beads belong on planet blue. There's clarity, there's order, there's a clearer understanding. However, when I give that same child 2 balls of Play-Doh, the red and the blue Play-Doh, and have him or her just, mush it together, we end up with this. The reason that MKs are not beads but are Play-Doh is that they're experiencing all of this. They're experiencing being cross-cultural. They're experiencing the great and the hard of life on the mission field. They're experiencing the pressures of being MKs during their formative years. They don't have that firm grounding in planet red. And because it's their formative years, and because they're kind of absorbing it just by life, by living it, they don't know what is wrapped up into that purple. It is a beautiful shade of purple, don't get me wrong. It is such a gift, such an honor for me to have grown up as an MK. I wouldn't trade it for anything, even though there have been hardships. But that purple is complex. And sometimes it takes a little investigating and a little help from outside of our purple to help us to pick out what belongs where. You'll see MKs doing things here in the States that are totally normal overseas and just don't fly here. It's not that they're trying to be rebellious or different, it's that they don't know that that part of their purple doesn't fly on this continent. So that's why I think it's so important to do things like we're doing today. And that is why people like you who welcome MK families home when they come back through your churches on their ministry assignments, this is why you can be a part of helping them, number one, to have understanding and compassion for the purple, but number two, to help bring clarity to their lives as well. So we're going to have a bit of a structure this morning, and it's going to be in 3 parts: sunlight, storms, and solace. And I'm going to walk you through some of the stories of the MKs I know. The first point is sunlight. This is the wonderful or the wonders of growing up MK. It is such a rich and irreplaceable experience for so many MKs I know. I love this verse from the Psalms. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. And that's the way I feel about growing up with a Canadian father, an American mother, living overseas, being born in France, going to school in Germany. What a gift. What an enriching gift that was for me and for my life. Some of my students have also had amazing experiences. I remember Tori, a young lady in one of my classes, who grew up in Jordan, and her friends, her playmates, were the king's children, were the princes and the princesses of Jordan, and they would sneak her in through a gate at the back of the property during the day, and she would play with the king's kids, and then they would sneak her back out through the gate at the back of the property. Who gets to do that, right? That's a beautiful piece of purple right there. Jason, who grew up on the Jungle River, from a very young age, he knew how to purify water. He knew how to teach basic hygiene to the people around him, to this primitive people group that they were there to serve. And he could perform minor medical and dental procedures when he was a teenager to try and help the people that lived around them. Alice her parents worked for an NGO, a non-government organization. And she, as a teen, was already training teams to build homes, to dig wells, and to slaughter animals to eat while you're building the homes and digging the wells. And then there's me. I grew up just north of Paris in at the time, it was a small town. It's turned into kind of the suburbs now. And we were one of the first missionary families. Do any of you remember the old slide tape presentations where you would click through the slides and you'd have a narration and this was the way we did things? We were one of the first really modern families who had moving videos one summer when I was 10. So I'm going to show you about 20 seconds of one of my family videos. There's no sound because you don't want to hear my dad's voice droning on in his, radio voice for the narration of it. But this is what my life was like. We were actually filming in the middle of the afternoon, but Oscar-level acting going on there because we all look like we're having breakfast. Look how tired I look. I just rolled out of bed, apparently. the fresh bread from the bakery. Then we get onto our bikes. Clearly, my brother's bike was a hand-me-down. It's way too small for him. And then we would ride our bicycles through small-town France, all the way to the place where my parents lived, down these tiny little roads in horse country. Do you see the horse in the corner there? And I don't know who got me that little sports whatever thing I'm wearing, but it's not attractive. And then we would turn the corner into the place where my parents work, into the European Bible Institute, that happened to be an 18th century castle. So little me grew up in a French 18th century castle. I was a very romantic and idealistic child. I was already writing books in my brain in those days, and I got to grow up in this amazing place. What a gift it was to me that my parents decided to follow God and to follow him to France, in my case. I still have an adrenaline rush whenever I think of croissants. And let me give you a little tip on croissants. If you get them in a paper bag and the butter kind of bleeds through the bag, that's a good croissant. If there's no butter stain on the bag, you need to find a better bakery. So what are the things that we love as MKs? I have a small list that was submitted to me by a bunch of adult MKs. They love the sound of monsoon rains on a home's tin roof. They love providing food and shelter for thousands of refugees. They love riding motocross bikes across a sea of sand dunes, bringing sustainable farming to war-ravaged places, seeing a baby who had hours to live being nursed back to life in a tent hospital, digging wells where water is scarce, eating a meal, this is for real, cooked over smoldering manure, and watching the northern lights reflect on a nearly still ocean. These are the memories that they carry in their treasure troves. And there's the hard stuff too, right? So this can lead to kind of a complex understanding of reality and a complex understanding of blessedness. A couple quotes to illustrate this from MKs. This is Alyssa. She says, "We didn't always have electricity, but we had fireflies. We didn't have malls, but we had marketplaces humming with life and stories." And Brett, who's from Argentina, Ecuador, Germany, and United Arab Emirates, she wrote this about kind of the contradictions of knowing so much and knowing so little by virtue of growing up MK. She says, "I can fly across the world alone to foreign countries, translate for doctors and dentists in Ecuadorian villages, live on a separate continent from my family at age 16, yet I'm stressing out over working at Famous Footwear." So all those other things that would be so intimidating to her peers to her are just normal. That's just what she was built to do. But getting a job in America and knowing what to do with a paycheck, that was a challenge for her. There are undeniable strengths to growing up as an MK, and when I present to parents, I keep going back to the strengths because they're just as real as the challenges, and we need to remember those to balance out our perception of who these people are. Some of what you see on this slide, they're adaptable, tolerant, communicators, insightful, bold, curious, catalysts, adventurous, problem solvers, global nomads, mature sometimes beyond their peers in a monocultural country like this, and inclusive. These are all irreplaceable pieces of growing up MK. And even the MKs I know who have had the hardest experiences overseas, 97, 98% of them, according to the last statistics, will say that they would never give it up for the world because of this, because of the wonderful that also comes along with it. So that's the sunlight. But what about the storms? The challenges of growing up as an MK. Another verse from the Psalms, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit." I love that psalm because I've experienced that psalm. And sometimes he does that. Sometimes he is close to us, and sometimes he does save us through people like the members of this church. We can be the extension of who God and Jesus are to the MKs who cross this platform. The beauty of growing up as an MK can also come with brokenness. I'm here to tell you firsthand that those two can cohabit in the same experience. With loss, with displacement, with identity confusion. Who am I? Am I American? Am I from Peru? Who am I at my core? Is God our family's job, or is God my Lord and Savior? How do we figure all of that out? And an MK called Danica wrote this, and I think it just beautifully expresses that tension of, there's a French expression that says, "Je sais pas sur quel pied danser." I don't know what foot to dance on. And some MKs have one foot on planet happy, one foot on planet sad, and they don't quite know how to find that everyday balance that they need. Danica wrote this. She said, "This is the tension I live in, how to reconcile the good bits, the dancing on moonlit beaches, the camaraderie of roasting jungle birds over an open fire, the heartbreaking beauty of untouched nature. How to reconcile all of that with the clouds of mosquitoes hovering so thick over your head that you can't see the sky, with boat trips where you fear for your life, with the soul-shattering pain of leaving an entire universe behind. So I linger, she writes, in this space between, the space of mourning and rejoicing, the space of bitterness and love. That is what so many MKs, whether it's a conscious thing or not, that's what they live with this duality of I love so much and I am hurting in so many ways as well. So what are some of the basic hardships that MKs experience? Like any child growing up in North America, there are going to be parts of living on a broken planet around broken people that are going to happen to MKs overseas just like they happen to children here. And there are some added ones that are more specific to MKs that I just want to introduce you to. The first of those is transitions. The average MK has 8 major moves in the first 18 years of their lives. That's a lot of major moves. And we're not talking about crossing, to the other side of town. We're talking about crossing borders. We're talking about crossing oceans and cultural divides. 8 major moves is huge. And you heard Danica in the quote that I read talking about losing a universe. That's what it feels like to the MKs, all the tangible and intangible pieces of what they're leaving behind. Returning home, quote unquote, to this culture for American MKs can be the hardest one of those transitions. So when you see your people walk into this room coming back for college or because their parents moved back for whatever other reason, you need to know that for most MKs and probably for them, this has been the hardest transition of their lives. Back when I lived in Germany and I taught at Black Forest Academy for 20 years before coming back here 15 years ago. Don't try to do the mental math, I'm 57. I would get calls in the middle of the night after they graduated from BFA, and with the time zone difference, they would come in at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I remember one in particular from Aaron, who had moved to New York City to attend Sarah Lawrence, had never lived in New York, had never really lived for any amount of time in the States. And I picked up the phone middle of the night, and she's already crying on the other end. And I said, "What's going on?" And she was this very soft-souled, artistic-minded kind of person. And she said, "Michele, I've been here and I don't understand anybody and they're all weird and my professors are scary and the streets are scary and I'm sitting on a dumpster in the rain in an alley in New York City calling you because I had to get away from everybody and I don't think I can do it. I think I have to go to a different school or go back to Germany." So we had a long conversation. At first I told her, "Okay, let's calm down. Tell me what's going on. Tell me how long you've been there. How long have you been in New York?" And she said, "I've been here 5 hours." And I thought, okay, this is going to be a really long transition for you because it's not going to get much better for another 5 months probably. But you need to know that when they come back here, which we assume is home to them, this for many of them is a foreign culture. And the expectation that they're going to do well and just kind of seamlessly fit into this world, that expectation weighs really heavily on them. Mookie is one of my favorite people who did a transition seminar with me. He's clearly Canadian, hence that. Tough hockey-playing Canadian 18-year-old who had just moved back to Canada from Brazil, where he had been born and raised. And one of the things we do in reentry seminars is work through grief and kind of inventory what it is. Why am I feeling this strongly? What are the things that I've lost? And I asked Mookie what he was grieving, and this tough hockey-playing Canadian boy just kind of melted into tears. And later showed me his journal, and he has allowed me to read for you how he expressed what it is that he lost in this monumental move. He said, "I've lost my home, my security, my church, my friends, my job, my relationships. It continues to haunt me that I will never see the places that I roamed in the same light again, nor will I breathe the air as someone who is planted there." That amount of grief that is accumulated over all the transitions of their lifetimes and kind of comes to a head in their final move to this country can be something really heavy for MKs to carry, especially if they're carrying it alone. Chronic goodbyes, this is related to the transitions, but most MKs, if I ask them, have you said 50 significant goodbyes in your life? Have you said 100? Have you said 500? The hands stay up a really long time because from childhood, for those begin their MK lives at that age. From childhood, the world of ministry is this revolving door of people coming and going, and they attach firmly because you might be my anchor point in this life, and then that person leaves or they leave. And they just have this expectation of loss, even at the beginning of relationships. I was in Nepal a few years ago talking about good ways to say hello and good ways to say goodbye with little third graders, because that's transition, coded language for transition. And there was this little boy called Ryan, and I wish I could do a British accent because that's where he was from. But I said, Ryan, how do you say hello to new people that you meet? And he said very firmly and proudly, well, I put out my hand and I shake their hand and I say, hi, my name is Ryan and I'm going to be gone soon. He puts the goodbye in the hello. That's how convinced he is that relationships will not last. Different MKs will process that differently. Some will attach less, some will attach more urgently. Some will be really affected by all the goodbyes, others will not be. But we need to be conscious that those who are affected are deeply affected by the number of goodbyes they say because their parents chose to follow God into ministry. This might be the most significant of all of the four that I'm giving you this morning. It's something I call the shoulds. These are expectations that PKs and MKs often feel are imposed on them by virtue of their parents choosing the ministry they chose. So the unspoken thing that they hear when they meet people like you or when they go to conferences or when they're doing ministry with their parents, the unspoken thing is, because you're an MK, you should be exceptional in every way. Because you're an MK, you cannot have any weaknesses. You have to be a theological expert at age 7 because your parents are missionaries, right? So a couple years ago, I was in Georgia with a bunch of adult MKs, ages 18 to 65. There's an age gap to speak to. And we started talking about the shoulds, and it was actually one of the first times that I had brought it up, and I wish you could have seen their eyes light up. That there's a name for this. It's called the shoulds. And I asked them, what are some of the shoulds that you're still experiencing even today or that you remember from your growing up years? Walking into a room and feeling, because I'm an MK, I should. Here's just a portion of the 2 whiteboards we filled with shoulds as they were kind of popping up from the group and reminding us of what theirs were. Shoulds are, I should be mature, should be happy, not admit to struggling, be able to fit in, be fluent in another language or more, be perfect. I love the sound of children. Be perfect, pretend everything is okay, never complain, be a spiritual superstar again as a child, be okay with being sad all the time, not upset anyone ever, be interesting, make friends with all of our supporters because that depends on me, always behave, understand all cultures, and be grateful. This is just a portion of the list that we put on those whiteboards. Now, there's a difference between instructions, which the Bible is full of, and shoulds. Instructions, even within a family, mean these are our standards, these are our expectations of you. We know you're going to fail, we're going to keep trying until we make progress. There's a discipleship component to that kind of instruction. The shoulds are entirely different, and it's not like anybody sits MKs down and says, you must live up to all of this. They assume that people watching them expect them to live up to them. And the unspoken mantra here is, you should do this, and if you fail to do this, you bring shame on your family, on God, on their work, and on yourself. And one failure is all it takes for them to be shame-filled for not living up to completely unrealistic expectations for them. And finally, I could do about 3 hours on trauma, but I won't. We're not talking trauma like a stubbed toe or an unmet wish. We're talking trauma that actually is strong enough to alter the brain and to alter one's ability to cope. So many MKs don't even know that they're carrying trauma within them that needs to be addressed. A few years back, the CDC did research into something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Not an MK population, but in a population that was pretty underserved. And they were looking at how many toxic stresses these people grew up with during their formative years and how that played out in their adulthood, how the negative future outcomes played out in their adulthood. And out of this list of 7 toxic stresses, they found that anybody who had 4 or more of them during those formative, really crucial years, anybody who had 4 or more of them were more likely for these negative future outcomes, like risky health behaviors such as addiction or eating disorders, chronic health conditions, both physical and mental health conditions, low life potential, what I call failure to thrive, underachieving in relationships, in the workplace, and in other ways. And in some cases as well, in the really sad cases, an early death by 20 years younger than peers who don't have the high ACEs scores. Here's what you need to know. 1 in 5 MKs, 20% of MKs, have high ACEs scores that put them in this category. And many of them don't even know it because it's normal for their family to live in a war zone or to witness starvation or to witness things that no other children do. So 1 in 5 MKs fall into this category, and that test does not take into consideration these MK-specific toxic stresses that they might also experience. And you'll notice that one of those is the shoulds. I do believe that that is one of the toxic stresses that MKs encounter. The good news is trauma can be treated. I'm here to tell you as a survivor myself that trauma can be healed with some séquelles, there's a French word that doesn't exist in English, with some remaining signs of it, but there is healing for trauma. But the missionary world needs to know that that's what they're seeing in their children. And a lot of times when mom and dad did great with whatever it was, evacuating in the middle of the night, because they don't understand the purple in their children, they don't realize that their purple people might not have done as well as they did. So informed people like you who love missionary families can start asking gentle questions to find out if they know what it is that they might be missing. So yes, there are huge benefits to growing up as an MK. Here are those strengths once again. And for some, there is also hardship. And we can't ignore that, no matter how strong the shoulds are that are telling us that we ought to. In those storms that they face, Jesus is the only possible anchor because their lives are so mobile that he is the only thing that will move with them, the only aspect of their lives who will be present and constant. And Jesus' people, you, can be part of that anchoring too. You can be an extension of him to the MKs who come through these doors when the families return here. They need safe places to speak their storms aloud, which brings us to Solace. How can the church help its MKs? Another of my favorite verses, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. And when those bruised reeds walk into a place like PHCC, you are going to be the ones welcoming them. Remember that you might not see the bruising because those shoulds are really powerful, and we won't want to show our bruising. But here are some ways in which you can enter into relationships with them that will allow down the road for you, number one, to enjoy their presence and who they are. They're not projects, they're people. And then if there is something that needs to be addressed, you can also be part of addressing that. So just 6 suggestions to you as we close this morning. The first, as a people of faith, as a church that supports their families, is to engage consistently, not just when they turn up in the summertime or whenever it is that they come through. Faithful curiosity and communication over distance and time creates relationship. If there's established relationship when they come back through, they won't feel like that 1-week project for the church. They will feel like they're coming back into a place that knows and understands and wants to help them in any way you can. The second one is ask good questions, and then I would add, truly listen. Sometimes we ask the question to be polite, and then we don't listen to what the answer might be, and we don't try to read between the lines of what the answer is that we receive. So here are some suggestions. Instead of saying welcome home, and again, the word home might be a little bit difficult for some MKs to deal with, say, how does it feel to be here? What has surprised you? What has been challenging for you? What freaks you out is a good thing to ask MKs who are just coming back. A lot of them will say the cereal aisle at the grocery store. That freaks them out. Too many options, and they've never heard of these brands before. Or instead of saying, you're so lucky to have lived overseas, you might want to say, what's the best part and what's the most challenging part of living overseas? Ask them, what do you miss the most? That's a really good question. And ask them, do you have any pictures of your life over there on your phone? I'd love to see those pictures. And what a gift it is to them to be able to speak of something that they assumed nobody was interested in. Number three, understand their layers. This is the purple piece, right? What you see is just the surface, and there's so much beneath that. What MKs initially display may not be the full picture, as we've already discussed this morning. Walk alongside them in casual ways so they feel safe revealing more within that relationship. Casual ways, go out for ice cream, do youth group stuff together, whatever it is that's just normal life in this country will make the possibility of relationship more real for them. One thing you need to know, they love to be sources of information. They love to educate people. So ask them to educate you on things you don't know that they've been privy to and might know more than you do about. I need to say that you might see MKs doing or saying things that look out of place here, that might even feel shocking to you. There are different standards of modesty, of substance consumption, of behavior, of social interactions in other places that will look maybe really out of place here. Before you judge, before you condemn, ask questions. Sometimes the best place to start is, oh, I noticed you just said that word. Is that an okay word to say in South Africa? And if they say yes, you'll say, oh, well, here, if we say that word, people will misunderstand it. So maybe, so asking the questions first can be really helpful. And not shame them for doing something wrong, because that shame part of our lives is really prevalent in MKs. Avoid assumptions. Not all MKs have thriving faith. Some of them have outright rejected faith. And sometimes we want them to be the people who read the scripture all the time and who tell their testimony all the time. No assumptions about that. Not all MKs feel called to missions. So sometimes we say, so you're going to go back to Uganda after you graduate from college? Maybe they want to be a plumber or a teacher or a doctor and not go back to Uganda. So not kind of putting that should on them by asking the questions wrongly. And then hold space for their journey without judgment. Speak into it when you can, but really just be curious, because that's how you discover what's wrapped up into their beautiful shade of purple. Fifthly, welcome them, don't platform them. There's a small nuance in there. Welcoming returning MKs with intentional hospitality is good. Making them know that they are seen and that they're welcome here is good. It's great to provide opportunities for them to reveal themselves, which will often happen in smaller groups for MKs, because larger groups are where they perform, smaller groups are where they can be themselves. Let them gradually step into roles like leadership that might suit them, but don't just stick them into that position first thing when they return. Offer them a voice in your youth or young adult ministry without putting them on display. So many times when mom and dad come back with the family, and I remember this, we call it the circus in my family. You come onto the stage, you say John 3:16 in 3 languages. Sometimes you wear something from that country. You answer all the questions. This is all good, and we understand that it is good because it's people like you who make our ministry possible, and we want to pay that back. We want to let you know that we acknowledge and appreciate. At the same time, it can feel like the church is a place for performance. So if you can just let them step into their natural giftings in the church without assuming that they want to do it, that would be helpful too. And then finally, offer practical help. Is there anything you need that I can help with? If you see them walking around in a Wheaton winter with a mid-season jacket on, ask them if they have a good winter jacket. Many of them will not. Many of them will not want to bug mom and dad for the money for the jacket, and so they will walk around with layers of mid-season jackets on in the Wheaton winters. I was one of them. A winter coat, driving lessons to get their licenses. MKs from other countries will not drive until they're 20 or 21 in some countries, so they might never have sat at a tractor like I did growing up and driven that around. They might need help with that. The medical world here is so different, helping them to navigate that. Taxes if they've got a job. All new things that are common to us that are completely uncommon to the average MK. And when you offer help, I encourage you to frame it in a way that lets them know that you really want to, and it would be your honor to help them, not a begrudging, okay, what do you need? We're the church, we're going to help you now. Somebody who says, I would love to buy you a coat, can I buy you a coat, is going to come across differently from somebody who says, oh, that coat isn't going to do. You really need a new coat. Let me see if I can get you one. You see the difference there? In summary, I would say this. I would say be Barb. Let me tell you about Barb. I came back from overseas with a huge chip on my shoulder. I did not want to be here. I didn't think I would like Americans or America. And Barb stepped in. My sister-in-law Ingrid had cleaned for her the summer before. She kind of passed that baton to me to clean house for Barb. And I cleaned house maybe a half an hour of the 5 hours that she paid me for on Wednesdays. But Barb became my person. She became my mentor in all things transition to this country. She asked questions about my pictures. She introduced me to American culture, to the Cubs, the Bears, and the Bulls, which I found out is essential if you're going to Wheaton College. I had no idea. We had lunch every day listening to Paul Harvey. She introduced me to him, to the radio voice of Paul Harvey. She was somebody that I could trust to care about me and for all of me, for what I had lived in the past, for what I was experiencing in the present, and for what I was fearful about for my future. She helped me with attention and devotion to trust Americans, and that was a hard hill to climb. And she assured me that there were people who were different than me, people who didn't know what river ran through Paris, who could actually appreciate me and love me well. And to quote Paul Harvey, she helped me to write the rest of my story. I am standing before you as an MK who has been through all of the hardships. I am the product of abuse, of different forms of abuse, of dysfunctional family, of abusive French school systems. I have been through cancer 3 times. I have felt alienated and neglected and abandoned. And yet, I stand before you knowing that Jesus is real and that he was there all along, even when I couldn't see him. And one of the reasons that I am able to be healthy in faith today is because of people like Barb. And you might not be able to do everything Barb does. She herself was on disability and had a lot of extra time on her hands. Not everybody does, but you can provide a piece of what Barb provided for me. If anybody knew Barb Holderbaum from South Wheaton, let me know. I want to talk to you afterwards. She's gone now. So that is my encouragement to you, to step in any way you can that is natural and that is from an honest and genuine concern for the MKs. I could honestly, had I known, on this slide, I could have said, be Marcia, and Marcia sitting right there. And on this second return back, so overseas 20 years, came back 15 years ago, it was Marcia and her friend Marilyn who were Barb to me at that point. MKs carry so much in their purple Play-Doh. With understanding, commitment, and compassion, the church, members of this church, can help those pieces to come together into a mosaic of grace. And that is what I consider myself today, a mosaic of God's grace ushered into my life through people like you. Finally, this is a quote that I show at the end of all my sessions with MKs because my prayer is that they will grow and heal to the point where they might be able to say something like this. I am an MK and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Whatever it is, I've seen it, tasted it, climbed it, explored it, and survived it. I've managed to grow straight and strong despite my tangled, far-flung roots. I've celebrated my uniqueness and learned to accept its limitations. I'm sometimes bruised, sometimes confused, but always grateful for a life so enriched and blessed by living between cultures. I am an MK. There is so much more to say about all these topics. My friend Sharon, who was in the back just a moment ago, is a counselor, a therapist, who could say so much more on the topic of trauma. All of that is, I'll skip this slide, all of that is in the book that I know you have some copies at the church that you can borrow. There's a table back there where you can get your own for yourself or for a missionary family or an MK you know. And if you would like to continue this conversation in any way, this is the rest of my information. The podcast is called Pondering Purple. It is just the audio version of the articles I've written. The Facebook group, MK Hub, is not a discussion group, no comments, nothing. When there's new resources, I post them there so people know that they've arrived. Thank you so much for caring for your missionaries so well. I know that the heart of a pastor is often reflected in the heart of a church, and your heart for MKs, I know, has had an impact on your congregation. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you that you care for each of us in our own unique shade of whatever Play-Doh has constituted who we are today. And I thank you that you are the God of possibility, not the God of shoulds, that you are the God of healing, not the God of imposition. I thank you that in the days when I did not believe that you were real, or if you were, that you cared, that you were loving, I thank you that you put people in my life like Barb, like Marcia, like so many others who showed you to me to such a degree that it was undeniable that you were present and that you were good. May we continue to find ways to love others well, including the purple people that come back on furlough with mom and dad and greet people in this church on a Sunday morning. Thank you that you showed us the way to be compassionate and wise and proactive in the help we offer. In your name.